The road stretched long and quiet beneath a blood-orange sky, the kind that made the chrome on a Harley shine like fire. The road reapers were heading home from a charity ride in the next county, their engines humming in unison. 13 men who lived by a code written not on paper but on scars, trust, and unspoken loyalty. Their president, Mason Gravestone Hayes, rode at the front, a man in his 40s with a kind of stillness that only comes from having seen too much. By the time they pulled into a small roadside diner off Highway 73, the sun had already begun to dip. The neon sign buzzed faintly, flickering between the words open and pen, as if even it was tired. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and rain-soaked leather. The waitress behind the counter looked up, startled for a second before forcing a smile. Her name tag read Lena. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her hair was tied back, her hands trembled slightly when she poured the coffee, but her voice was soft and polite, the kind people use when they're trying not to show fear. Most places stared when bikers came in, the patches, the tattoos, the reputation. The road reapers were used to it. But this was different. Lena's eyes weren't filled with judgment, they were filled with exhaustion. Gravestone noticed the bruises first, faint, faded yellow around her wrist when she set down the coffee pot. No one else said a word. Bikers weren't in the habit of asking strangers about their pain. Still, Mason felt something twist in his gut. They ordered the usual burgers, fries, black coffee, the food of men who'd been on the road too long. Lena moved between tables with quiet efficiency, her smile a small act of courage. The place was empty except for a trucker dozing in the corner booth. The jukebox played a low tune that sounded older than the building itself. When it came time to leave, Mason laid a $50 on the table for a $20 meal. He caught her eye and gave a nod, one of those silent gestures that said keep it. She smiled, a real smile this time, and tucked the cash under her notepad. It wasn't until the men were mounting up that she came running out. Her apron was off, and her eyes darted nervously toward the parking lot. She didn't say a word, just slipped a folded piece of paper into Mason's gloved hand and whispered, "Please." Then she turned and hurried back inside before anyone could ask a thing. They rode off, the sound of their bikes echoing into the dark. Mason didn't open the note until they stopped 20 miles down the road for gas. He unfolded it under the fluorescent light, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. The handwriting was small, shaky. It read, "If you're reading this, I need help. My ex-boyfriend Rick won't leave me alone. He's a sheriff's son, and no one here will stop him. He comes by the diner after midnight. Says if I ever try to leave, he'll make sure no one finds me. Please, I don't know who else to ask." The note ended with an address scrawled at the bottom. The silence that followed was heavy. The men gathered around, their faces hard and unreadable. Tank, the club's vice president, let out a low whistle. "Sheriff's son." Mason didn't answer. He just looked at the note again, his jaw tightening. He'd seen 100 stories like this before, men in power using fear as a weapon, hiding behind badges and fathers who'd cover for them. "Grave," Tank said quietly, "this ain't our business." Mason looked up, his eyes steady. "She made it our business when she handed me that note." That was all it took. No one argued after that. They headed back to town under cover of night, their engines muted by the distance and the storm rolling in from the west. The diner lights were off when they passed by, but the old Ford pickup parked in the gravel lot wasn't Hayes. Mason recognized the type, a lifted truck, loud, expensive, built to be intimidating. They parked half a mile down the road and walked the rest, boots crunching on wet gravel. From behind the diner, they heard shouting, a man's voice, drunk and angry, and a woman's pleading in between. Mason's fist clenched around his gloves. They moved fast and silent, like ghosts on a mission. When they rounded the corner, the scene froze. Rick had Lena pinned against the wall, his forearm across her throat. Her eyes widened when she saw them, but she didn't scream. She just mouthed one word. "Please." Rick toned, swaggering when he saw the patches. "You boys lost." His tone was slowed, his arrogance thick as a whiskey on his breath. "This here's family business. Sheriff's business. So how about you saddle up and—" He didn't get to finish. Mason stepped forward, calm but deadly. "Let her go." Rick smirked, tightening his grip. "You gonna make me, old man?" Tank moved behind him without a sound. One twist, one movement, and the kid was on the ground gasping, his arm bent backward at a wrong angle. Mason pulled Lena gently away, checking her neck. Her pulse raced under his fingers. "Get in the truck," Mason told her softly. "You're safe now." Rick spat in the dirt, groaning. "You don't know who you're messing with." "My dad. Your dad's the reason you think you can do whatever you want," Mason said. "But tonight, that ends." They didn't beat him. They didn't need to. Sometimes fear worked better than fists. Mason leaned down, his voice low and cold. "If you ever come near her again, we'll make sure the next time you wake up, it'll be in a ditch. Understand?" Rick nodded, eyes wide. The storm began to break overhead, thunder rolling through the hills like judgment. By dawn, Lena was sitting in the clubhouse kitchen, wrapped in one of the guys' flannel jackets, a mug of coffee steaming between her hands. She'd barely said a word on the ride there. The clubhouse wasn't what outsiders imagined. It wasn't some lawless den. It was a brotherhood, worn leather chairs, walls lined with photos of rides, charity events, veterans aid helped. Mason sat across from her, letting her speak when she was ready. "He's been doing it for a year," she finally whispered. "After I broke up with him, he'd show up wherever I worked. He got me fired from 2 places already. The sheriff told me to stop causing trouble." Mason's jaw flexed. "You ever think about leaving town?" "I tried," she said, tears filling her eyes. "He found me. Said he'd kill my dog if I didn't come back." Tank stepped into the kitchen, a fresh cup in his hand. "We've seen worse men than him fall harder. You just hang on." Over the next few days, the club kept a quiet watch. 2 bikes always parked near the diner. One brother followed her home every night until dawn. The sheriff's boy didn't show for a while, maybe licking his wounds or waiting for backup. But Mason knew men like that didn't quit. They always came back. He was right. It happened a week later. Lena was closing the diner when the power went out. She tried calling the sheriff's office, but the line was dead. She grabbed her phone, hands trembling, and before she could dial, headlights cut across the window, the same Ford truck. Rick stepped out, holding something shiny in his hand. He kicked the door open, shouting her name. "You think you can hide behind those bikers? They don't scare me." But what he didn't know was that 2 road reapers were sitting in the parking lot of the gas station across the street. When they saw the lights flicker and heard the crash, they moved fast. By the time Rick had cornered her behind the counter, Mason's voice came from the doorway. "Step away from her." Rick spun, his face pale when he saw them. Mason, Tank, and 4 others stood there, their leather cuts glistening under the flickering neon. Rick pointed the knife toward them. "You'll all go to jail," he shouted. "My old man runs this county." Mason stepped closer, unafraid. "Then is running it wrong." Rick swung first. He barely got halfway before Tank blocked the hit, twisting his wrist until the knife clattered to the floor. Another brother kicked it out of reach. Rick tried to fight, but he was outmatched, angry, sloppy, stupid. They didn't beat him to death. They just made sure he'd remember. Mason's punch landed square in his gut, sending him gasping to the floor. "You hurt women," Mason said, voice shaking with quiet rage. "You use your father's name like a shield." but shields can break. When the sheriff arrived, sirens cutting through the rain, he found his son handcuffed with zip ties to the diner's porch railing. Lena stood nearby, bruised but unbroken, surrounded by men who looked ready to take on the whole department if they had to. The sheriff glared at Mason. "You got no right interfering in my family's business." Mason met his eyes calmly. "Your boy made it ours." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the sheriff looked at his son, bloody, beaten, sobbing. Something in his expression cracked. Maybe shame. Maybe the realization that the law he'd sworn to uphold had been broken by his own blood. He nodded once to his deputies. "Take him in." The sirens faded as they drove away. The rain had stopped. The road shimmered under the diner lights, and the air smelled clean for the first time in a long while. Lena stood there, tears streaking down her face. Mason handed her a small patch, the Reaper skull stitched on black cloth. "What's this for?" she asked softly. He smiled. "A reminder. You've got brothers now. Nobody hurts you again." Months passed. The sheriff resigned quietly after his son's trial made headlines in 3 counties. Rick got time. Not enough, but some. Lena found a new job at a bigger cafe in the city. Every now and then, a group of bikers would pull in for coffee, and she'd smile when she saw the patches. One evening, she wrote something on a napkin and slipped it under a mug before Mason left. He didn't open it until he was back on his bike, the wind whipping around him. It said, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." He folded it carefully and tucked it into his wallet next to an old photo of his daughter, who died young years ago, another girl no one had saved in time. Maybe that's why he couldn't walk away. The road reapers rode into the night, their taillights glowing red like small embers fading into the dark. The world would never write headlines about men like them. But sometimes, the only justice worth believing in doesn't come from badges or judges. It comes from those who see pain and decide not to look away. If you believe bikers can be heroes too, share this story.